I was watching a kid play with blocks the other day, just stacking them up, knocking them down, laughing. And it hit me. We make learning so complicated. We treat it like it's this serious, heavy duty where you have to sit in a library and frown at a book until the information surrenders. But that's not how nature works. Nature is playful. The secret to learning instantly isn't about forcing your brain to work harder. It's about tricking it into playing a game. You see, your brain is a pattern matching machine. That's all it wants to do. It wants to take this new, strange thing you're looking at and hook it onto something it already keeps in the attic. The secret pattern isn't magic, it's just how we're wired, but we forget it because we get obsessed with fancy words. So here is how you turn that switch back on, simple as that. First, stop trying to memorize the names of things and start trying to understand the thing itself. If you know the name of a bird in Latin, Greek, and English, you still know absolutely nothing about the bird, so ignore the jargon and look at the behavior. Let's dig into this business of names, because it is the single biggest trap in the history of human education, and we fall into it from the moment we enter kindergarten. You see, I remember walking in the woods with my father when I was a little boy, and he'd point out a bird. He'd say, "You see that bird? It's a Spencer's warbler." And then he'd say, in Italian, it's a tordo, in Portuguese, it's a zordo, in Chinese, it's a chun-ling. And then he would stop, look me right in the eye, and say, "No, you know the name of that bird in all the languages of the world, but when you're finished, you'll know absolutely nothing whatever about the bird. You'll only know about humans in different places and what they call the bird. So let's look at the bird and see what it's of doing. That's what counts." That moment changed everything for me. It taught me the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. And most of us, when we try to learn, we stop at the name. We get a definition, we memorize it, and we think we've learned. We haven't. We've just collected a label. It's like owning the box a toy came in, but throwing away the toy itself. Think about the concept of inertia. You're in a science class and the teacher asks, "Why do you fall forward when the bus stops?" And the kids all shout, "Inertia!" And the teacher smiles and puts a gold star on the board. But what have they actually said? Inertia is just a word we invented to mean things keep doing what they were doing. If you say, "I fall forward because of inertia," you are essentially saying, "I fall forward because things tend to keep moving." You haven't explained why it happens. You've just given a fancy name to the fact that it does happen. You haven't looked at the mechanism. You haven't visualized the molecules, the forces, the way the floor of the bus stops moving, but your head, which isn't glued to the floor, keeps going because there's nothing pushing it back yet. That's the reality. The word inertia is just a shorthand, a filing cabinet label, but it isn't the knowledge. When you strip away the names, you force your brain to deal with the actual phenomenon, and that is where the instant learning happens. Because names are arbitrary, you could call gravity shimijej, and the apple would still fall. But if you spend all your mental energy memorizing shimijej constant equals 9.8, you miss the beautiful, terrifying fact that the entire Earth is reaching up and pulling that apple down toward its center. When you focus on the behavior of the thing, the why, and the how, the learning becomes sticky because it's based on reality, not on a dictionary. It's like looking at a map versus walking the territory. The map has names, Main Street, River Road. You can memorize the map. But walking the territory means feeling the mud on your shoes, smelling the pine trees, seeing how the river bends because the rock is harder on the left bank than the right. When you try to learn a new subject, say biology or coding or economics, don't start by making flashcards of the vocabulary. That's fragile knowledge. It breaks as soon as the questions get tricky. Instead, watch the system work. Ask, what is this piece doing to that piece? If you're studying economics, forget supply and demand for a second and just think about people. Think about a guy with too many apples and a guy who is hungry. Watch the transaction happen in your mind. See the desperation or the abundance. Once you understand the pressure between those two people, then you can slap the label, market forces, on it later if you want to sound professional, but the understanding has to come first, naked and unnamed. Real learning is about observation, not classification. Classification is for librarians, observation is for scientists, for learners. And the wonderful thing is, the world is much more interesting than the names we give it. The centrifugal force is a boring phrase, but the feeling of being thrown against the door of a car as it turns a corner, that is a physical reality that your body understands instantly. If you can translate every concept you encounter back into that physical reality, back into the behavior of the bird pecking its wings, or the ball rolling to the back of the wagon, you bypass the part of your brain that gets tired of memorizing lists, and you engage the part of your brain that evolved to survive in the real world. You stop studying and start seeing. And the fascinating thing about doing this, about refusing to be satisfied with just the label, is that it makes you annoying to people who are pretending to know things, but it makes you infinitely more capable of actually doing things. You become the person who can fix the radio not because you know the name of the resistor, but because you know the flow of the electricity is getting stuck right there. Now we come to the second point, and this is the real test, the litmus test for whether you're actually learning or just bluffing yourself, because we are all excellent at bluffing ourselves. You have to be able to translate the complexity into the language of a 6-year-old. And I don't mean you treat the 6-year-old like they're stupid. I mean you treat the subject like it's universal. You see, there is this terrible habit in academia and in business, and even in just regular conversation, where people use thick, heavy, fancy words to cover up the fact that they are confused. They say things like, "We must utilize the synergistic parameters of the paradigm," and everyone nods because they're afraid to look dumb, but nobody knows what it means because it doesn't mean anything. It's fluff. It's smoke. It's a way of signaling, "I belong to the club," without actually doing the work of communicating an idea. If you truly understand something, I mean really understand it, down to its nuts and bolts, down to the gears turning inside, you should be able to hand it to a child without using a single technical term. Why a child? Because a child has no patience for your jargon, and they have no social pressure to be polite. If you say momentum, the child says, "What's that?" You say mass times velocity, the child says, "What's mass?" You say, "How much stuff is there?" The child says, "What's velocity?" You say, "How fast it's going." Eventually, through this pestering, you are forced to say, "It's how hard it is to stop a heavy thing moving fast compared to a light thing moving slow." And suddenly, clicks, you understand it too. You've stripped away the paint and found the wood underneath. You've moved from memorizing a formula to visualizing a bowling ball hitting pins versus a ping pong ball hitting pins. This is harder than it sounds. It is physically difficult. It requires you to do the heavy lifting of translation. When you read a textbook, the author has done the organizing for you, but often they've organized it in a way that is abstract, efficient for experts but impenetrable for learners. When you force yourself to explain it simply, you are forced to reorganize the information in your own head. You have to find the connection between the abstract idea and the physical world. You can't hide behind the word photosynthesis. That's a label. You have to talk about the sun hitting a leaf and a little factory inside the green stuff turning light into sugar so the plant can eat. If you can't tell that story, if you can't visualize the little factory, then you don't know photosynthesis. You just know the definition, and definitions are fragile things that disappear when you get nervous. And there's a trap here that you have to watch out for. People think that using big words makes them sound smart. It's actually the opposite. Using big words effectively allows you to skip over the details you don't get. It's a way of saying, "A miracle happens in this step," or "Black box happens here." But when you speak simply, you have nowhere to hide. If there is a hole in your logic, the 6-year-old will find it. They will ask, "Why?" at exactly the point where you are fuzzy. They are the ultimate peer review. If you are explaining how a computer works and you say, "The CPU processes the data," you haven't explained anything. But if you try to explain it as a billion tiny light switches flipping on and off, and how a switch that is on means weiss and off means no, you start to grapple with the actual mechanism of the machine. The beauty of this approach is that it connects all knowledge together. Jargon separates subjects. Biology has its special words, physics has its special words, history has its special words. They build walls so you think these subjects are different universes. But simple language, the language of pushing, pulling, cold, wanting, fearing, that language is universal. When you translate high-level concepts down to this bedrock, you start to see that the patterns in economics are the same as the patterns in ecology. You realize that a recession is just like a drought in a forest. But you never see that connection if you stay stuck in the terminology of assets versus rainfall. You have to descend the ladder of abstraction until your feet are on the ground. So The exercise is this. Take the concept you are struggling with. Imagine a 6-year-old is sitting right there, looking up at you with big curious eyes. Or maybe imagine you're explaining it to your grandmother who is very smart but doesn't know any physics, and try to explain it. Listen to yourself. Listen to where you stumble. Listen to where you use a word that you know they wouldn't know. That stumble is the gold mine. That is the specific part of the idea that is dark to you. It's a map of your own ignorance. And once you fix that explanation, once you can make the child's eyes light up with understanding, you realize that the simplicity isn't just for them. Now we get to the third point, and this is where the fun really begins. This is where you stop being a student and start being an inventor. You must build a physical model in your head. You see, a lot of people think that mathematics or history or economics are just things written down on paper. They think the equations as the physics. But the equation is not the physics! The equation is just the bookkeeping. It's the receipt. It tells you what happened, but it doesn't show you the event. To really learn instantly, to have that flash of insight, you have to turn the paper into a movie. You have to create a mental laboratory where you can actually see the things happening. I'll give you an example. When I'm thinking about electromagnetic fields, which are invisible, you can't see them, you can't touch them. I don't just stare at the vector symbols. That's boring and it gives you no intuition. In my mind, I build a picture. Sometimes I imagine the field lines like long, flowing hair in a swimming pool, waving back and forth when the water moves. Now, is the electromagnetic field actually made of hair? Of course not! That's silly. But the behavior of the hair in the water, the way it bends, the way it swirls, the way a disturbance over here wiggles the strands over there, that mimics the mathematics perfectly. By building that physical model, I can close my eyes and see the answer before I even pick up a pencil to calculate it. I can feel the pressure of the field. You have to do this for everything. If you are studying history, don't just memorize. The treaty was signed in 1815. That's dead data. Build the set. Close your eyes. Visualize the room. It's cold. Maybe there's a draft. Smell the wax of the candles. See the guys in the funny wigs and look at their faces. Who looks smug? Who looks nervous? Who is holding the pen like a weapon? When you turn the abstract fact into a tangible scene with texture and color and mood, your brain hooks onto it differently. Your brain evolved to remember where the tiger lives and where the ripe fruit is. It did not evolve to remember text on a page. So when you turn the Treaty of 1815 into a dramatic scene with tigers and fruit, with threats and rewards, you hack your own biology. And this goes for the most abstract things too, like computer programming. A variable isn't just a word, visualize it as a box. A loop isn't just code, visualize it as a little conveyor belt. When the data goes into the function, imagine a raw block of wood going into a grinder and coming out as sawdust. If your code breaks, don't just look at the syntax error. Run the movie in your head. Watch the block of wood hit the grinder. Did it get stuck? Was the grinder turned off? When you have a physical analog, you can use your common sense. We all have excellent intuition for how physical objects move. If you drop a ball, it falls. If you push a wagon, it rolls. We have terrible intuition for abstract algebra. So, the trick is to translate the algebra into wagons and balls. It's about making the invisible visible. It's about not being satisfied until you can walk around the idea in your mind. If someone explains a concept to you and you can't picture it, stop them. Say, wait, what does that look like? If they say, well, it doesn't look like anything, it's fourth-dimensional hypertopology. You say, okay, but if I were an ant walking on it, what would I feel? Force the abstraction into a sensory experience. You are building a simulation. And the amazing thing about a simulation is that you can run it forward. Once you have the machine built in your head, once you see the gears of the economy or the flowing water of the electrical circuit, you can start asking, what if? What if I make this gear bigger? What if I increase the pressure of the water? You don't need the textbook to tell you the answer anymore. You can see the pipe bursting in your mind's eye. You can hear the gear grinding. That is what intuition is. It isn't magic, it's just the result of having a really good, high-fidelity mental model that you play with. Just like a child plays with blocks, knocking them over to see what happens, testing the structural integrity not with formulas, but with your own imaginary hands. Now, point number 4 is about honesty, aggressive honesty, because the person you are most likely to fool is yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. We all have this tendency to nod along when we are reading a book or listening to a lecture. The professor says something, and we recognize the words, so we nod and say, yes, understood. But recognizing a word is not the same as understanding the concept. We get this warm, fuzzy feeling of familiarity, and we mistake that for knowledge. But it's a mirage. The only way to dispel that mirage is to actively hunt for the gaps in your own story, to look for the holes in the cheese. When you are doing the visualization or the explanation we talked about, when you are explaining to that imaginary 6-year-old or watching the mental movie of the history treaty, you have to pay very close attention to your own internal rhythm. This is a subtle thing, but it's crucial. You'll find that there are parts of the story you can tell slowly and clearly. The apple falls because gravity pulls it. You're confident there. But then, you'll hit a patch where you start to hurry. You'll start to use more vague language. You might say, and then, because of the thermodynamics, the engine starts. Whoa, stop! Rewind the tape. Why did you use the word thermodynamics? Right there. Why did you speed up? You sped up because you were skating over thin ice. Your brain knew that it didn't really understand the connection between the heat and the motion, so it threw a fancy word at the problem to cover up the hole. It's like a keep out sign that you put up to stop yourself from looking too closely at your own ignorance. That stutter, that hesitation, that feeling of hand waving, that is the most valuable signal you have. That is the gold mine. Most people, when they feel that confusion, they ignore it. They think, I'll figure it out later, or I probably know it, I just can't explain it. No, you don't. If you can't explain it, you don't know it. So when you find that gap, don't feel bad about it. That gap is the specific location where learning happens. If you know everything else, looking at the parts you already know is a waste of time. It's like polishing a car that's already shiny. You need to focus entirely on the scratch. Once you identify that you don't understand how the heat turns into motion, you stop everything. You don't reread the whole chapter. You don't start the course over. You go back to the source material, the book, the lecture, the paper, and you look only for that one answer. You become a hunter. You are hunting for the missing puzzle piece that fits into that specific hole in your mental picture. And when you find it, when you read that paragraph that explains that the gas molecules get excited and hit the piston harder, you take that piece and you plug it into your story. And suddenly, the story is continuous. The friction is gone. You can walk from the beginning of the idea to the end without tripping. This is an iterative process. You explain, you stumble, you look up the answer, you explain again. You stumble a little less, you look up a smaller detail, you explain again. Eventually, the path is smooth. And the incredible thing is, once you have repaired these gaps, the knowledge becomes part of you. It's not something you have to remember anymore, it's something you see. It's a solid structure that doesn't have any holes for the wind to blow through, and you realize that the discomfort of not knowing wasn't a sign of stupidity. It was just the sensation of the map being incomplete. And now you have drawn in the coastline, and finally, we arrive at the fifth point, which is the secret sauce, the thing that turns hard work into pure joy, and that is connecting the new idea to something completely unrelated that you already love. You see, the brain is a funny thing. It hates isolation. If you try to feed it a fact that is floating all by itself, a random date, a lonely equation, a piece of vocabulary with no friends, the brain will reject it. It's like trying to hang a coat on a wall with no hook, it just slides right down to the floor. To make something stick, you need hooks, and the strongest hooks you have are the things you are already obsessed with. I have a friend who loves cars. He lives for them. He knows every piston, every valve, every gear ratio, but he was struggling terribly with biology. He had to learn about the cell, and he was bored to tears memorizing mitochondria and ribosomes and cell membranes. It was just Greek to him. So I told him, stop thinking about biology. Think about a Ferrari. I said, the cell isn't a blob, it's a chassis. The cell membrane, that's the bodywork, the aerodynamic shell that decides what air gets in and what dirt stays out. The nucleus, that's the driver, the guy making the decisions. And the mitochondria, that's not a boring organelle. That is the V8 engine, my friend. It takes the fuel, the glucose, and it burns it to create the horsepower that drives the whole machine. You should have seen his face. The lights went on. Suddenly. Biology wasn't this alien, squishy subject anymore. It was mechanical. It had logic. He could use his massive, existing mental library of automotive knowledge and just map the new biology terms onto the old car parts. He didn't have to build a new neural structure from scratch. He just moved into a house he had already built and rearranged the furniture. And the amazing thing is, the analogy doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, it's better if it's a little bit weird. If you love baking, explain chemistry in terms of flour and yeast. An exothermic reaction isn't just molecules moving, it's the way the oven blasts heat when you open the door. When you do this, you are leveraging the emotional connection you have with your passion. You don't just know about baseball or knitting or video games, you feel them. You have an intuition for them. So when you graft a new, cold subject onto that warm, familiar framework, the new subject inherits that intuition. If you understand the flow of a basketball game, how the defense shifts when the ball moves, you can use that exact same feeling to understand the flow of electricity in a circuit or the flow of money in an economy. The defense shifting is just the resistance changing. The ball moving is just the current. The patterns are identical because nature tends to repeat herself. She uses the same tricks in physics as she does in biology, and frankly, as she does in human social dynamics. This technique also saves you a tremendous amount of energy. Learning something entirely new is metabolically expensive. It's hard work for the brain to forge new pathways. But likening something is cheap. It's easy. It's play. You are basically saying, oh, this quantum mechanics stuff, it's just like the time I tried to date two girls at once. Superposition. It's a joke, but it's a joke that holds a deep truth about probability and state. And because it's funny, or because it's related to something you enjoy, you stop resisting the information. You stop fighting the book. You welcome the new facts because they help you flesh out your analogy. And you'll find that as you get better at this, you start to see the unity of the world. You stop seeing subjects as separate boxes, math, English, art, and you start seeing them as different languages describing the same underlying reality. The structure of a Bach concerto has a lot in common with the structure of a mathematical proof. They both start with a theme, develop it, twist it, and resolve it. If you love music, you can air the math. If you love math, you can calculate the music. This cross-pollination is where creativity comes from. It's not just about memorizing for a test. It's about taking two flint stones that I've never touched before, like poetry and programming, and banging them together to see the sparks fly. That is when you aren't just a student anymore, but you are awake to the way the world is actually put together